Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Congressman Price, what can you tell us tonight about the elements of the deal? Is there any funding for a Trump wall in this deal?
Yes, there is funding for a wall in this deal, but it is something considerably less than the concrete barrier that he was talking about, and it is far less than the funding in any of the alternatives that we were dealing with. In other words, the number is less. $2 billion that would be available, a good deal less than the $2 billion that would be available if we simply passed a continuing resolution for the rest of the year. And of course, it's many billions less than what Trump shut down the government over. So the wall didn't fare too well.
So, Congressman, just to underline this for the audience, in the Congress had already passed some initial funding for some of certainly the planning, at least, of the Trump wall on the southern border. And you're saying that if the Congress just continued spending as is, there would have been more funding for that than there is in the deal that you reached tonight.
Yes, that is what I'm saying. I also think it needs to be said, although you'd never know it listening to the president, that we have a lot of fence down on the southern border. It was built back 8-10 years ago and has been added to some since then. About 650 miles of fence in places where you could argue a physical barrier is needed. But so much has changed since then. I mean, the attempted crossings are at a historic low, a 40-year low. The mix of people coming to the border is now people turning themselves in, families, unaccompanied children. A wall, of course, is irrelevant to that. And then there are all kinds of other security measures, to say nothing of Homeland Security priorities in the Coast Guard and elsewhere, that just make a lot more sense than the wall.
It is Tuesday, the 12th of February of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. It's great to be back, folks. I did have a very fabulous, quite fabulous visit with my father and his colleagues and others, and family and extended family. It was quite wonderful. A good time was had by all. Humor abounded. The familial prank has reared its prankster head once again too. My niece brought the cake, among many other things as well, but she had the cake made, and it was great. It was a banana and marble cake, or banana cream marble cake, and with a buttercream frosting, and it had it wasn't real gold flakes, but gold flakes piped on, and a few other colorful things. It was really beautiful. And the middle icing between layers was this really dark a nice tasting icing, but it turned everybody's lips black like we had, well, black goth lipstick. And it was really funny. And, of course, the tongues, too. Everybody's tongues were this ink black. It was quite funny, and everybody laughed, and all the kids were having fun with it, and the old people in their wheelchairs who had been wheeled down thought it was one of the funniest things that ever happened in their lives. And so then they thought maybe a shot of rum might be able to break that down on their tongues. Not for the little kids, but get some rum into some people, and you don't know what's going to happen. But nothing really did because it can't move as fast anymore. Good thing, too. But it was great. My dad is doing quite well. He's getting 3 square meals a day, and he's packed on some pounds. He looks good. He walks around in a walker, but he gets around. So I was quite pleased with that. And I got to visit with extended family that I haven't seen for a while. I mean, better part of a year in some instances. So I consider that long. How it goes. Well, let's get back into what's been going on, because a lot happened over the weekend, of course, and we'll try to catch up a little bit. And, that was Democratic Representative David Price of North Carolina, who I say was explaining the contours of the deal that will keep the government open and Homeland Security funded. A compromise was reached of sorts, and we'll see if Donald Trump will like it. Of course he won't. He wants some sort of edifice. It's got to be a continuous edifice. Oh, boy. Which just goes to show that I think the guy was trying to incite to riot. Are there any DOJ rules on indicting a sitting president on inciting to riot? I mean, in the actual Nuremberg rally that he was throwing there in El Paso. Oh, boy. Well, I think there aren't really any, but they'll make one up that says, no, we can't do it. He gets to do whatever he wants to do because he's the president of the United States. Well, what about the guy that was wearing a tan suit? What about that? Well, I think we're going to have to hire a lot of sergeant-at-arms and get some people over and indicted and, taken away. Frog marched, preferably. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Speaking of frog marched, ICE blamed the mass raids in North Carolina over the weekend on local police officers for not cooperating with the agency. Oh, you won't cooperate with us? That's fine. We'll just do it anyway. Yeah, the SA Gestapo. Some of them actually wear brown shirts. Most of them are kind of the black thing. Even though they look like Ninja Turtles, they're still sort of like the black shirts from, Mussolini's Italy. Take a look. You'll see what I mean. Oh, boy. Hey, Denver teachers are going on strike for the first time in 25 years. Yeah, they like to have a bump in pay and maybe, a little bit of equality over the pay rate for everybody. And, maybe also, how about some supplies and infrastructure money? That would be nice. And new evidence suggests the New York Times was tricked into retracting a major Russia probe bombshell. I'm shocked. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where former Fed Chair Paul Volcker warned that Trump's handling of domestic issues as well as trade talks with China is hurting the United States' long-term prosperity. Well, this is another trademark, I told you so. Thanks, Paul. And the passing of an angry generation died with Albert Finney on last Friday, but it was barely mentioned in the American press. All that and more in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. go to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and that's a nice way to engage, and Kelly is there quite a bit. Monitoring that, of course, we all have to make ends meet, do we not? But please engage over there, and you can engage with us on social media, and I'll fill you in on that in just a moment. If you would first please then take a look to the leftish of the page from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, and you will notice the contribute button. Do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. Expenses are mounting, and there's only a finite amount for any one of us, but collectively we might be able to stave off the inevitable, whatever that might be. But your generosity keeps this Resistance Radio resisting as the founders originally intended oh so many generations ago. Indeed. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do that by looking for us at Netroots Radio. Wow, that's so easy. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary for the show on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, an integral part of the show because those are where the links and show notes are. Okay? And you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West because everything's difficult when you don't pay attention. Gotta live with your mistakes sometimes now, don't you? Indeed. And pick up podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy by way of Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. Yeah, and that's how that goes. All right, let's get on with this first article here because I got to get in the swing of things. You know, taking a weekend off, a little bit more than a weekend off, can really mess up with your groove. But I really did have a great time. God, it was fun. Oh, I should mention really quickly that I did notice that in terms of my training as a chef, you know, if you're not in a bustling metropolis, you're kind of left behind in good food. I had some really good little items down there in, I got to say, what I would derisively call, at least in my arrogant youthful past, you know, the typical corporate restaurant, you know, the middle to high end types. And so I was never a big fan, you know, because it's generic in some ways. But I was in what I would consider to be, you know, maybe a little bit formulaic in a sense. It was really nice. I mean, I love the way it was decorated, and the bar area was quite nice and everything. But the bar bites that we had, where we were sitting for one of the weekend nights with my dad and a few of his other friends, younger friends, shall we say, around my age and a little bit older. Well, the bar bites in this place was great. Had a little nice asparagus soup. They had some blistered jalapenos and serranos that had a little pickle to them, just very light to cut the fire. But every now and then, maybe they didn't de-seed and devein, what some might say properly. But I say it's like, you know, a gift, a surprise, because I was looking for that, and it was great. Oh, my gosh. I didn't have any Bloody Marys, so I couldn't really test the bar from that, because you got to look how they make a Bloody Mary, right? And then, you know, for me, a regular gin martini, too. So that was quite fun. Yeah, I was pleased and saw some things on the menu that, oh, wow. Okay, maybe I should affect this in some fashion, and I will. All right, let's get into this first article here that comes out of Think Progress, and it is by Rebecca Entralgo. Immigrant communities in North Carolina were rattled this weekend after Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, arrested an estimated 200 undocumented immigrants last week. The rural town of Sanford was like a ghost town after nearly 30 employees at a manufacturing plant were taken into custody Tuesday morning as part of a ongoing criminal investigation, according to ICE. If you're brown, you're going down. My godmother was there, an 18-year-old man told local station ABC 11. He was like, yeah, they took her, and what they are doing is taking people to the break room, and if you didn't have valid ID, they were taking them out. The raid was filmed by 27-year-old local musician Christian Enrique Canales and showed ICE agents checking the identification of anyone trying to leave the property. Your papers, please. I'm not sure if they'd be asking white people. Let's be clear. Well, Lee County officers then took Canales into custody for communicating threats of law enforcement, or to law enforcement, meaning that he was filming them, which is a constitutional right already been decided, but the cops always know best. They beat the crap out of you, and then they get told later, oh, well, we're sorry, we didn't follow procedure properly. We won't do it again, and then they keep doing it again and again and again because they're the SAF and Gestapo. In East Charlotte, an area that prides itself on its diversity, at least a dozen undocumented immigrants were arrested. Many were pulled over randomly by ICE, told to show their papers, subsequently handcuffed. And that was according to immigrant outreach organization Comunidad Colectivo. The arrests come as workplace raids have skyrocketed under the Trump administration because if you're going to destroy the economy and the backbone of the United States, that's one way to do it. I keep telling everybody, property is always more valuable when delivered vacant. I got to tell you, that actually went over well with some of the Property Rights Act types that I know back in the day who thought that property taxes were terrible. That is something they understand. And the taking of property to build a wall, what? If you're not going to remunerate properly, then you can't do it. But they're doing it anyway because Vlad said to. ICE officials argued during a press conference that these sweeping raids are what happens when local sheriff's officers don't cooperate with the agency as a result of sanctuary city policies, which bar such cooperation. However, there are no official sanctuary cities in North Carolina, and the SA Gestapo goons in their brown and black shirts, they don't care. They're there as a shock troop to get people used to the idea that this is the new normal. Contrary to what ICE and most Republicans in Congress believe, these agreements between police officers do not make communities safer. In fact, they further embolden ICE to ruthlessly conduct mass raids or set up identification checkpoints to detain any undocumented immigrant who happens to cross an agent's path. And I would say it's not limited to undocumented immigrants. It's also U.S. citizens who just happen to be brown or another ethnicity that they don't like or a behavior they don't like. Oh, you were born in Oregon? White utopia? Well, you're going to, I don't know, some other place. You're not an American like us. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that to malign a particular region of the United States. I was basically just trying to use a drawl to show a less than, I don't know, simian response to the world. The North Carolina raids come as the federal government is barreling towards another potential shutdown, not over money for a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border, but over the number of beds at ICE detention facilities. Congressional Democrats want to impose a cap of about 16,500 beds, forcing the Trump administration to prioritize deportation only for immigrants who pose real security threats. ICE, however, has historically disregarded caps imposed by Congress. While Congress set a limit of 40,500 detention beds, ICE has consistently increased the number of detained immigrants above that number. What about all the icebox baby gulags? What about that? Yeah, they don't want to be caps on beds. They want to build gulags. Elam Katami, also of Think Progress, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Thousands of teachers from Denver Public Schools gathered at the state capitol Monday to kick off their first strike in 25 years, demanding pay increases and a long-term solution to the state's ongoing problem of underfunding schools. Let's have a lottery. Don't you dare. That was the further destruction of the educational system. Thank you very much. You don't gamble with learning, please. The strike, which is led by the Denver Classroom Teachers Association, affectionately known as the DCTA, will affect more than 200 schools in the district. Administrators have planned to keep schools open by hiring substitute teachers. And also, they're going to have to make a few administrators teach, too. They hate that. They really do. And they take it out on the kids. I know, because I took part in helping some teachers strike back in the day. And that will be through preschool class. Preschool classes have been canceled, though. Depending on how long the strike goes on, school officials have acknowledged that they have to close some schools if they are unable to hire enough substitutes. Educators voted to strike last month after disagreements with school administrators over pay. The major dispute is over a merit-based compensation system called pro-comp. What that does is that I can understand it in a certain way, but let me explain this really quickly. What they did is they would promise teachers that if they worked in more difficult situations, maybe a really underfunded school in subjects like math or whatever, they would get a bonus. So then teachers did that, and sometimes they wouldn't get their bonus. And what the strike, one of the conditions of the strike is that get rid of that bonus system, spread it out evenly over everything, and let's start funding schools again. And I guess that's a sticking point. Oh, we can't pay for education unless people go into debt on their credit cards. Maybe. The union, however, has pushed for a more traditional approach to salary structure, calling for a system that allows all teachers to get raises and cost of living increases. That's in lieu of these bonuses. During negotiations, the district was $8 million short of what the union asked for. To overhaul that compensation system, teachers, meanwhile, argued that the district could reduce administrators' bonuses and take money out of its reserve to pay for it. Now, and then the administrator said, "Are you kidding me? We've already paid for our Torino visit and excursion and around Torino, and I'm expecting that bonus to pay for it." At a press conference Monday, the teachers' union's lead negotiator, Rod Gould, said he hopes school administrators come to the table today, ready to listen so we can get back to work, because our teachers want to be in the classrooms with their kids, and it's true. While educators were on strike, students at East High School in Denver took to the halls Monday morning in a show of support for their teachers. Videos shared on Twitter showed students chanting, "Pay our teachers." Well, that's what we chanted too back in the day. Wow. Colorado is one of the worst offenders when it comes to public school funding. According to Education Week's 2018 state-by-state assessment of public education, the state earned a D+ for overall school finance. Colorado received an F for its spending on public education. Well, overall school finance, they could play football with a D- in some of these major universities. But the F on the spending, that might preclude them getting a starting position. Maybe they have to walk on. A key reason for this is that Colorado legislators can reduce school funding in order to balance the budget using a tool called negative factor. Over the years, lawmakers have trimmed billions of dollars in funding to rural schools, schools serving at-risk students, and those serving populations with a high cost of living. As the Coloradoan reported in 2017, Colorado spends an average of just about $9,500 on each public school student, which is about $2,700 less than the national average. That's the national average. You got to put it in like Alabama and Arkansas too. Denver is the latest city where teachers have gone on strike to demand better pay and funding for schools. Last year, weeks-long strikes in red states like West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arizona led to pay increases and more money. Los Angeles teachers recently ended a week-long strike after achieving several of their demands, including a 50% reduction in standardized testing and a push for smaller class size. Cody Fenwick brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Last week, the court published an in-depth and partially redacted transcript of a hearing between Robert Mueller and lawyers for Manafort. Of course, you know that's Trump's former campaign chair. Barely knew him, though. Barely knew him. This trove of information provided a fresh glimpse into the workings of Mueller's team, revealing new details about the case that look increasingly bad for Trump. And as reporter Marcy Wheeler noted, it also appears significantly contradicts previous reporting from the New York Times about a major development in the Russia investigation. That development came when Manafort's lawyers accidentally filed an improperly redacted document addressing allegations that their client lied to the special counsel about material facts in the investigation. Most strikingly, investigators believe Manafort lied about a meeting with Russian-born political consultant Konstantin Kilmenik, who the government believes has ties to Russia intelligence, where the campaign chair handed over polling data on the 2016 campaign. Now, they believe he has ties to Russian intelligence. Yeah, I think he does have ties to Russian intelligence. When the New York Times first reported on this fact, it contained a stunning revelation. Manafort had given the polling data to Kilmenik to pass along to Oleg Deripaska. Yes, now he does have close ties to the Kremlin, doesn't he? This was significant for many reasons. First, of course, it ties the campaign directly to Moscow, which has been working on efforts to help secure Trump's victory. Second, previous reports of emails between Manafort during the campaign showed that he had offered private briefings to Deripaska to use his position close to Trump to fulfill his debts to the oligarch. And third, it makes the Trump administration's recent decision to lift sanctions on Deripaska, specifically in a particularly generous fashion, look even more suspicious. You mean to those people who weren't paying attention? I keep telling you, I told you so. There also appear to be other significant facts that the Times report got wrong or reported in a misleading way. For example, it reported that Manafort transferred the data to Kilmenik in the spring of 2016 as Trump clinched the Republican presidential nomination, according to a person knowledgeable about the situation. But the new transcript shows that Mueller's team appears to believe the transfer happened on August 2nd of 2016. This is significant in the timeline of the Trump campaign because it comes after Manafort's emails about potential briefings for Deripaska and after the campaign's infamous meeting at Trump Tower, which Manafort attended with a Russian lawyer promising debt on Hillary Clinton. I actually think that what motivated most of this is that Manafort and others didn't want to have one of those convenient heart attacks, convenient muggings in a hotel lobby, convenient polonium poisonings, convenient falls from a 5-story building moving a piano. And you don't own a piano, and you don't have anything to do with the 5th story. Indeed. All right, let's get to our break. And when we come back from the break, we're going to go through weather from around the world, because I don't know about you, but there is weather. It is all around the world. And we'll finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, All in the Family. The Oscar-nominated film Shoplifters, winner of the Palme d'Or at Cannes, certainly contains shoplifting, but it's about so much more. From award-winning director Hirokazu Koreeda, the film is an unconventional look at family and what it means to be one. Shoplifters is set in a part of Tokyo you won't see in travel brochures. When we first meet the Sumida family in their cramped apartment, we assign conventional roles to the members: man of the house for Osamu, grandmother for Hatsu, tween son for Shota, etc. These assumptions go by the wayside, however, as the onion of how they support themselves is unpeeled. Early on and pivotal to the story, Osamu and Shota bring home a young neighborhood girl named Yuri on a particularly cold night after finding her outside alone. After a few days, a statement in itself, she's noticed missing, and it quickly makes the TV news. The Sumidas, aware, only half-jokingly rationalize that it isn't kidnapping because the child's family abused her and they weren't asking for ransom. It's clear they have other values. The Osamu-Shota, man-of-the-house tween relationship is interesting. We see them work a fairly professional shoplifting operation, quipping that food in a store doesn't belong to anyone yet, but their complementary emotional needs are quite clear. Eventually, the boys' moral conflicts accelerate a reckoning that all families must confront in time, that things change, as the grandmother figure presages in a beach scene where she covers age spots with sand. A struggle such as this between nobility and desperation could be a prescription for some heavy-handed art house preaching, but that never happens with Shoplifters. Its reflection is balanced with humor, and its kudos speak to its very human statement. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Winter storms have walloped California this year, and snowpack is piling up. But just a few years back, the state was wrung dry by a record-breaking drought, and more dry spells will surely come.
I think everybody agrees that we need more water resources.
Adina Payton, an oceanographer at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She points out that her home country, Israel, once faced the same problem.
Israel had water issues forever and ever, and they don't have water problems anymore because they converted pretty much 90% of water use to desalination.
Ocean desalination hasn't enjoyed as much traction in California due to its cost and because of concerns that the plants would damage coastal ecosystems, both when the seawater's sucked in and when leftover super salty brines are released. Now, writing in the journal Water, Payton and her team have assessed the environmental impact of the nation's largest plant, the Carlsbad Desalination Plant north of San Diego. Here's the good news. Scuba dives revealed that the communities of starfish, snails, sea cucumbers, and other creatures that live on the sandy ocean bottom offshore have not budged since the plant opened in 2015. But the bad news? The plume of salty runoff stayed intact much farther out than models predicted, rather than easily blending with closer seawater.
When you have a pool of salty water that doesn't mix, it prevents oxygen from penetrating, so it can cause lower oxygen levels close to the bottom. And obviously, all the organisms that need oxygen are not going to be happy.
Ecosystems offshore from the Carlsbad plant were already disturbed by cooling water discharge from a power plant at the same site, she says, which could explain why the marine life was unfazed. But at more pristine sites, especially those rich in biodiversity like kelp forests, a salty plume might do more harm. The state's already planning more ocean desalination projects up and down the coast, and Peyton says her lesson is this.
There's tons of water in the ocean, and we can use it. We just have to do it responsibly.
First step, updating our models of how salty wastewater behaves offshore to ensure that our thirst for drinking water doesn't cause an ecological sea change. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For an expectant mother, taking care of her developing baby means taking good care of herself. One way she can do this is by ensuring she gets vaccinated. If a woman is or might be pregnant during flu season, it's especially important to get her annual flu shot, preferably before the end of October. In addition, women should be vaccinated against whooping cough during the 3rd trimester of each pregnancy. Failure to get vaccinated places both mother and baby at increased risk for serious complications of these infections, including hospitalization and even death. If you're pregnant or planning to get pregnant, ask your healthcare provider when you should get your vaccines. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Sweetie, want some fruit? You have to use the right tool for the job. A power drill is the wrong tool to slice fruit. Just like an antibiotic is the wrong tool to treat viruses, including colds and flu. Antibiotics are only needed for certain bacterial infections. When they aren't needed, antibiotics won't help you, and the side effects could still hurt you. Ask your healthcare professional when an antibiotic is the right tool and when it's not. Visit cdc.gov/antibiotic-use.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Hanging in Adolf Hitler's office in 1931 was a large portrait of Henry Ford, because when it came to anti-Semitism, Hitler said, quote, "I regard Henry Ford as my inspiration." I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Facts regarding Ford's anti-Semitism are well known, undisputed, and indeed self-authenticated. Some were included in a biographical sketch of him in a recent edition of the magazine of the Historical Society of Dearborn, Michigan, the birthplace of Ford's eponymous car company. In response to that article, the mayor of Dearborn, John O'Reilly, banned the distribution of the journal because the story interfered, he said, with his message and policies of inclusion. And O'Reilly, it seems, may well have full authority to censor the magazine because it's published by the city's historical commission, which is part and parcel and paid for by the city. Fortunately, censorship in America often backfires, and it did here. The mayor's attempted censorship has caused the article and the journal to be distributed far wider than it ever has been in the past. So now many, many more people, including many in Dearborn, know about Henry Ford's virulent and dangerous anti-Semitism, which is all to the good, because, as the philosopher and writer George Santayana said, quote, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
A bipartisan, bicameral group of lawmakers announced Monday night that they'd reached an agreement in principle on a spending deal to avoid another shutdown ahead of Friday's midnight deadline. The deal includes $1.375 billion for 55 miles of fences along the border, compared with the $5.7 billion Trump had sought for more than 200 miles of walls. Although the deal omits a strict new cap Democrats had sought on immigrants detained within the United States as opposed to at the border, it limits overall levels of detention beds maintained by ICE. To avert a shutdown, the deal needs to be written into final legislation and passed by both the House and Senate and signed by the president. So how would Trump reconcile the lack of wall funding? Reports say that the White House is firming up plans to redirect unspent federal dollars without invoking a national emergency. Done by executive order, the idea floated by Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney is to shift money from 2 Army Corps of Engineers flood control projects in Northern California, as well as from disaster relief funds intended for California and Puerto Rico. The plan would also tap unspent Department of Defense funds for military construction, like family housing or infrastructure for military bases. News of the deal broke just before Trump was set to take the stage at his rally in El Paso, Texas.
And if it's Monday, it must be El Paso. That was the site of the president's rally tonight, and the counter rally headlined by Beto O'Rourke within sight of the president's venue. President went hard after O'Rourke. He went hard after the news media and the Mueller case and made his case for the wall all over again, while just minutes before he emerged on stage, word had arrived from Congress that they appear to have a deal in principle to stop this looming next shutdown. At one point, President Trump said the last government shutdown was important to show people what's going on at the border.
But you know what? If we didn't do that shutdown, we would not have been able to show this country, these politicians, the world, what the hell is happening with the border. That was a very important thing we did.
Outside the Trump rally, there was the Beto O'Rourke-led counter event. O'Rourke gave up his seat in Congress from El Paso for what became a losing Senate campaign against Ted Cruz. Nonetheless, he remains a voice, and tonight went after the president on his treatment of immigrants.
We can show the rest of the country, as we make our stand here together tonight, that walls do not make us safer. Walls will require us to take someone's property, their house, their farm, their ranch, to build a wall at a time of record low northbound apprehensions. A president who describes Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals. We have the chance to tell him and the country, immigrants commit crimes, including violent crimes, at a lower rate than do Americans who were born in this country. El Paso has been the safest city in the United States of America, not in spite of the fact that we're a city of immigrants, but because we are a city of immigrants.
By the way, inside the arena, as Trump continued his bizarre attacks on the media, one idiot in a MAGA hat shoved and swore at a BBC cameraman and other news crews before being pulled away. Freshman Representative Ilhan Omar came under fire over the weekend for what some are calling anti-Semitic tropes on Twitter. CNN has the story.
Ilhan Omar is now apologizing after House leadership and many of her fellow Democrats called on her to do precisely that. Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer released this statement about her, saying that, quote, use of anti-Semitic tropes and prejudicial accusations about Israel's supporters is deeply offensive. We condemn these remarks and we call upon Congresswoman Omar to immediately apologize for these hurtful comments. And the backlash over this tweet. This is where this all started. She had tweeted, quote, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby." And it was her response to the message critical of the Republican House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, for going after Congresswoman Omar and her support of the anti-Israel movement called BDS, or Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. Later, Omar accused on Twitter the lobbying group AIPAC for paying politicians to be pro-Israel. So let's go straight to Capitol Hill and CNN's congressional correspondent there, Manu Raju. And so, Manu, what is the response now from Congresswoman Omar?
Well, she's offering an apology. She says, anti-Semitism is real, and I am grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. My intention is never to offend my constituents or Jewish Americans as a whole. We have to always be willing to step back and think through criticism, just as I expect people to hear from me when others attack me for my identity. This is why I unequivocally apologize. She goes on to say, at the same time, I reaffirm the problematic role of lobbyists in our politics, whether it be AIPAC, the NRA, the fossil fuel industry. She said it's gone on too long, and we must be willing to address it.
It should be noted that when rebuked, Omar apologized. When Republicans rebuked Steve King of Iowa for embracing white nationalism, he simply railed against them. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From UN headquarters, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. Imagine starving in a war zone only to learn that enough food to save you and millions of others sits deserted nearby. That's exactly what's transpiring now in Yemen, where a key food depot has become a pawn in the country's devastating proxy war.
The Red Sea mills that are located in the port city of Hodeida hold enough food for 3.7 million people over a month.
Jared Wright is a policy advisor at the international NGO Mercy Corps.
This is a massive amount of aid, and it's really a launching off point for organizations to then deliver that aid around the country. This grain has been inaccessible for over 5 months now.
The war in Yemen pits the country's government, backed by a Saudi-led coalition which includes the U.S., against Houthi rebels aided by Iran. In a country reliant on imports for 90% of its food, it's perhaps no surprise the port city of Hodeida on Yemen's western coast has become a key battleground. Last June, Yemen's government launched a campaign to retake the city, but the ensuing fighting proved so costly that international mediators pushed the warring parties to agree on a ceasefire in December.
The agreement itself, while it was agreed in principle, it has not been implemented on the ground. So what we're seeing is that the front lines effectively cut across these grain silos. And because there's been no agreement between the government of Yemen and the Houthi authorities on the ground to pull back from their positions, the grain silos have thus become inaccessible to the UN and to humanitarian organizations.
The UN warned Monday that for each day the grain in the Red Sea mills goes undistributed, the higher the risk it rots before ever reaching the millions who desperately need it. To Wright, it's just the latest tragic anecdote in a long and painful war.
This is entirely a man-made conflict, and that conflict is really driving the hunger crisis that we're seeing right now.
Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is 35 degrees Fahrenheit. It even feels like 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's a good thing. Because reality is what reality is, not some, actually, reality is subjective, isn't it? Well, we're doing the weather. Let's not talk philosophy. We're going to have quite a bit of rain today, mostly in the late afternoon, early evening, through the night. Looks like we'll have, just about a quarter of an inch. We will have a high of around 50 degrees today. That's quite warm. Winds are currently negligible out of the west-northwest, but will have shifted out of the south-southeast at 10 to 15 miles per hour. And there were heavy winds when I traveled from Wairika to Dunsmuir. And is that how that works? Yeah, well, maybe it was Dunsmuir to Wairika. Regardless, heavy winds. And I was buffeted around a little bit, and I have a pretty good profile-type car. So that's even more. Oh, my gosh, we're going to have a whole inch overnight. And then it looks like another half inch tomorrow when the winds shift out of the east, continuing at 5 to 10 miles per hour with gusts maybe 20 to 30. Pollen is rated as none. Air quality index is 24 parts per million in the good range, and the daytime UV index is a low 2. Barometric pressure is falling massively. That's why we're going to be getting this rain at 29.62 inches. Visibility is down to 7 miles right now, and relative humidity is 74%. I believe it's going to go up when we get all that rain. Oh, and I should mention we have been and will continue to be in a winter storm warning because we will be having overnight lows, mid-30s. Tomorrow we'll be in the high 40s. But come Thursday, Friday, it looks like we're going to have a snowy mix, which usually means sleet. Okay? Ice. Always fun. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. It's like a network of weather stations that people purchased. Yeah. Okay. Oops. I'm sorry. There it is. London is 52 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 48 and partly cloudy. Rome is 57 and fair. Well, Rome is always fair, no matter what it is. Kiev is 38 and light rain. Kabul is 36 with light rain. Hong Kong is 64 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 40 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 69 and mostly cloudy with a lot of wind. San Francisco, California is 41 and mostly cloudy with a wind advisory. I bet it's a small craft advisory. No, it's even worse. It's a high wind warning. Sustained winds of 20 to 30. Okay, I was getting close. And then gusts are going to be 40 to 50. Thanks very much. That's really fun on the bay. And it looks like Manhattan, New York is how we like to call it, is 27 and snow with a weather advisory. What could it be? A gale warning. Winds everywhere, people. Winds are everywhere. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Jennifer Ablon of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, it looks like Paul Volcker is going to weigh in, and good thing. He's warned that Trump's administration's handling of these domestic issues, whatever they might be, and the trade talks with China, what's that all about, is hurting the United States' long-term prosperity, and I told you so. And here's an expert. We have not been on a constructive track, Volcker said, and I think that's fair to say. Volcker, widely credited with ending the high levels of inflation seen in the U.S. during the 70s and early 80s, said Trump's big tax cuts and spending increases underscore the lack of transparency of the president's administration. We rammed through a massive tax bill. Whatever you think about that tax bill, it shouldn't have been rammed through Congress without any debates at midnight on December 31st, Volcker said. On December 22nd of 2017, Trump signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs shrinking the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21%, cutting taxes on private businesses by about 20%. It was passed without a single public hearing. Well, of course not. I mean, Trump's not going to show us his taxes either. Transparency? That's a bad word.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Anonymous worker bees at the Guardian have been working on this obituary of Albert Finney for quite some time, and now it's finally come to fruition. As it always is and always will be when you're a great actor like Albert Finney, at least in his homeland, because it caused barely a ripple here in the United States press. The New York Times did have an obituary. There were some others that were like the Billings, Montana Gazette had a little obituary. And when I say little, I mean little. And for a great actor of his generation, some of us may have considered Albert Finney's generation of angry young men to be the greatest generation. That's not to take anything away from the generation that came just before him, but they were of that generation, actually, somewhat. Grew up with the bombs falling upon their heads as they were growing up. Now, because he pursued an acting in roles that weren't the roles that Olivier initially took, they were hoping that maybe Richard Burton, Kenneth Branagh, Albert Finney, all were touted as the new Oliviers. Well, there's only one Olivier. Okay, let's be clear about that. And there will really only be one Richard Burton, one Albert Finney, one Kenneth Branagh. So that's no fault of Finney for not achieving that status of classical repertory theater, though he did do many of that on the national stage, I mean, in Olivier's troupe. But he pursued, let's say, not such lead roles. And, we might remember him in Aaron Brockovich. I remember him more from Two for the Road. Also in Malcolm Lowry's Under the Volcano. That was John Huston directed that. His turn in Under the Volcano is one of the tour de forces. And he had many. Now, Two for the Road was done by Stanley Donen, one of his few directorial efforts here in the States, mostly known as a French director. The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Donkey Skin. Yeah, it sounds better in French. Okay, I'm not going to attempt it, though. That was one of the great movies of all time, and Albert Finney and Audrey Hepburn made it so. Though we have to not forget that he was really one of the great quintessential actors of late 50s and 60s acting. And up to the present, because his body of work spans that long. Farewell, great man. All right, we better get out of here, and stay tuned tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Netroots Radio will be broadcasting on in all its broadcasting glory, 24/7, 365. So do tune in tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, de manger jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.